This meeting is being recorded.
Our presentation tonight is buckwheats and the butterflies that use them. Many of you know Dave Nunnallee, as he's a co-founder of the Washington Butterfly Association, and he has led many field trips in the past. He's a retired engineer, but has had an intense interest in natural history, including birds, butterflies, dragonflies, native plants, and native natural history in general. He's also the co-author with David James of the book, excuse me, Life Histories of Cascadia Butterflies. He's had a particular interest in buckwheats with an emphasis on those used as host plants. Thank you, Dave, for being with us tonight, and feel free to share your screen.
Okay. And I think I'd better start my, I didn't keep my PowerPoint. Well, here's my PowerPoint, it's still there. Okay. Buckwheats. We've all heard quite a bit about buckwheats lately. I hope tonight we'll be able to talk about a little bit about how to identify buckwheats and why they're important to butterflies. And then we'll go through a number of the buckwheats and the butterflies that use them. As we go through, Paulette will raise your hand once in a while. When she gets a few questions, we'll take a little break and see if we can address some questions. Don't make them too hard. I don't know much. So getting into first of all, what is a buckwheat? Well, number one, they're native plants. They're found only in the Americas. They don't occur anywhere in the old world, just in the Americas, and they're primarily in North America. A few species get down into South America. In fact, as far south as Chile, but the vast majority are right here in the western part of North America. Eriogonum is in the family Polygonaceae. They're in the knotweed family. One of the characteristics of buckwheats, and this helps often to ferret out a plant that's in your hand to see if it could be a buckwheat. The flowers are small, very small. The flower heads are typically clusters of numerous flowers, and the small individual flowers are held in clusters, which are wrapped in a little conical or a round bottom sheath at the base. That's called an involucre. This is a drawing of what an involucre looks like. This thing, can you see my cursor? Anyway, that's the involucre. Yes. And this is the flower, an individual flower. Each involucre may have as many as, well, typically as many as 8 flowers in it. And each flower head, like there's 3 little flower heads up in the drawing to the right. Each of those flower heads can have a number of involucres. So the individual flowers can be numerous. Each involucre, as I say here, can have up to 20 flowers in it. And each individual flower will have 6 tepals, that is 3 petals and 3 sepals. They're very similar, so most people don't try to differentiate them, but the petals will be on top and the sepals under them, if you care to see the difference. This is James Reveal. He's kind of the father of buckwheats in America. He's described a lot of them. He was the grand old father of pretty much everything Eriogonum. This picture was one I took in June of 2014 at a conference we had down in southern Idaho. Very unfortunately, Dr. Reveal passed away later that same year, very suddenly and unexpectedly. So we lost a wealth of information and knowledge when we lost Jim Reveal. This is the man who is essentially taking his place. This is Ben Grady. He's, as the caption shows, he's from he teaches in a small college in Wisconsin, and he's the head of the Eriogonum Society now. He's a great guy, very knowledgeable, and he was a student of Jim Reveal's. So that's kind of the movers and shakers. A few factoids about Eriogonum. We have 253 Eriogonum species in the Americas. Most of them are in North America and mostly in the West. There's very few species in the East, and those that are in the East do not extend up into New England. They're in the southern part of the East Coast. Eriogonum is a big genus, fourth largest in North America, and the others are Carex, the sedulous, Astragalus, the milkfishes, and Penstem. And each of those have more species than Eriogonum. Eriogonum is divided into 7 subgenera, and most subgenera is something we don't hear too much. Most animal and other classifications don't really use subgenera, but it's one that's commonly used in plants, specifically the buckwheats. Anyway, the 7 subgenera in Eriogonum, we have 4 of them in Washington and Oregon. There are 21 Eriogonum species in Washington, twice this number in Oregon, and more than 100 in California. Clearly, the centroid for Eriogonum diversity is south of us. In fact, we're kind of up at the northern limits. California and Nevada, and perhaps on east into Utah, are really where the bulk of the Eriogonum species are. We have 6 genera of Lycaena, just before we finally get to the butterflies. 6 genera of Lycaenas which use buckwheats in our area. And when I use the term use, I'm talking about using them for their larval host plant. There are many kinds of butterflies which use buckwheats for nectar, but these are the ones that depend on buckwheats for their life history, for where they lay their eggs and the larvae develop. Of those genera that use buckwheats for their host plant, we have the green hair streaks, Calophyres, and they use, I'm going to adjust my screen here just a little bit. Okay. Calophyres, we have 3 species of Calophyres, which use a combined total of 5 buckwheat hosts. Of course, the blue copper is another one that uses 7 buckwheat hosts. Gray hair streak uses a couple of buckwheat hosts. And then the lupin and acnon blues, the plebeius blues, they use a combined total of 13 buckwheat hosts. And then the buckwheat blues, that's our euphalotes, use another 10 combination of buckwheat hosts. And the Mormon meadowlark, which I'm including as an honorary lycaenid, although it's actually not, uses 7 buckwheat hosts. That's a total of 44 buckwheat hosts here in Washington. So there's a lot of lycaenid butterflies which depend a great deal on buckwheats. And by the way, the buckwheat in the background here is an umbulatum. This is one of the several varieties of sulfur flower that we have in Washington. This is variety Majus, M-A-J-U-S, up in Quartz Mountain, and this is the only one that's white instead of yellow. Just a few butterfly factoids. Some butterflies must use buckwheats as their larval host plants. There's actually several that's a requirement. Some butterflies use 2 or more species of buckwheats, and others use only a single species of buckwheat. A few butterflies may even be identified by the buckwheat on which they are found. This is getting to be proven to be less and less the case as we learn more about both the buckwheats and the butterflies that use them. A scientist named Gordon Pratt, who is down in California, east of Los Angeles, has made quite a case of identifying different kinds of butterflies, especially blue butterflies, by the host plant that they are found on. Such is probably less the case up here than it is in California. But anyway, there still are some some butterflies which can be identified simply by their host plant. Also, some plants are. I'm missing a lot of my words on the screen because there's other stuff covering it up. So if I miss some stuff, I'm sorry about that. Some plants host a number of butterflies, and among the buckwheats, Eriogonum elatum, the tall buckwheat, is certainly one of those. And tall buckwheat hosts all of these butterflies: Sheridan's hairstreak, Western green hairstreak, Mormon metalmark, Columbia blue, and the gray hairstreak. These are all species which spend their life history with the larvae feeding up on this buckwheat, or some of them also use other plants, but all of these certainly use elatum, one of our most common buckwheats.
Dave, we have a question about whether you have broken it down into Western Washington and Eastern Washington. There's a question about how many blues use, or how many butterflies in general use buckwheats in Western Washington.
That reminds me of something interesting. In the short time we got to know Jim Reveal, I asked him how many buckwheats are there where he lived, which is in New York. And he said 0. And that's about how many we have in Western Washington. So I don't know if that answers your question, but we have very few, if any, buckwheats in Western Washington, except up high in the mountains near the divide, or perhaps coming down the Columbia Gorge, where the gorge cuts through the mountains. Anyway, any other questions there?
Oh, what about the Olympics?
I'm sorry. Oh, the Olympics. Yeah, there are buckwheats in the Olympics. Good point. And there are blues. There are blues using them there. So this is how our buckwheats break down for Washington State. There are again 4 subgenera that are represented here. The first subgenus on the left, subgenus Oligogonum. Some people like to pronounce it Oligogonum, so it's however you please. This group of buckwheats are the ones I like to call the showy buckwheats. Some of the showiest of our flowers are in that group, and many buckwheats which are reared by nurseries are in this group, the Oligogonum. The other major subgenus is Eucycla, and this includes typically buckwheats which are a little more scruffy, not as well developed with the larger flowers, things like elatum and nudum and strictum, and we'll talk more about those later. And the other 2 groups are annual buckwheats. These are buckwheats which have to grow up from seeds each year, and their populations tend to be sketchy. They tend to move around from time to time, sometimes harder to find. But we'll talk about all these as we go through this. The first subgenus, Oligogonum or Oligogonum, we have 9 species in this subgenus in Washington. Most of them are common and widespread. All of them are known to be larval hosts for at least one butterfly species. And introduce the concept of leafy bracts. Leafy bracts are not considered true leaves, but they're made from leafy type material. They're usually very small little leafy structures on the plant stem, and they very often occur immediately below the flower head, some of them in the middle of the flower stem. Anyway, leafy bracts, I can't read my own words up there because the screen is, let me see if I can reduce this a little bit. Just, nope. Anyway, so anyway, the leafy bracts number 2 or more on buckwheats that are in this subgenus, but rarely 3. In fact, I think in Washington there are none that have 3 bracts. I'm talking about groups of bracts, which typically surround the stem. When we get to the next subgenus, we'll find that it does have three leaves in a bract, or bracts with 3 leaves. So that's one way to separate these two subgenera. And this is Eriogonum compositum, the northern buckwheat. This is one of our biggest and showiest buckwheats in Washington. It is an excellent nectar source for a number of different kinds of butterflies. It's also a larval host plant for well, the list is in the upper right of your screen there. Blue copper, Sheridan's hair streak, Columbia blue, lupin blue, Akron blue, and Mormon metalmark. And there may be more that we don't know about yet. These plants can come in bright gold and yellow color or in white color. Again, the white ones are that variety Magus or Magus that I mentioned earlier, which tends to occur on higher elevations. This is a typical habitat with the Eriogonum compositum. This is up Reeser Creek. If you know Reeser Creek area where we've been so many times, before we get to the turnoff that goes over to Garrison Springs, this is a scene off on the left side of the road. Unfortunately, people have begun building homes up in this area, and this big field now has a couple of homes in it, and it's now posted. We used to be able to run all over this area, but it's getting more restrictive up there. But anyway, this is northern buckwheat habitat. And here we have a couple of the Columbia blues. You flow these Columbia on the northern buckwheat Eriogonum compositum. It's a mating pair. During the mating season, females will seldom leave their host plant. The males tend to move around much more. But when you see a mating pair, it's very likely you're looking at them on the host plant. This is Eriogonum flavum. This is a kind of buckwheat that many people have not seen at all. Basically this occurs in the Blue Mountains. It has been mapped to other areas by the University of Washington herbarium site, but I've never seen it anywhere else. At first glance, this looks a lot like the sulfur flower, Eriogonum umbulatum, but if we look closer, there's some significant differences. One is that on each flower stalk, each stem, there's only one flower head, one cluster of flowers. And they tend to look kind of like little pom-poms. They're quite tidy looking, as you see in the bottom right picture there. Umbulatum, by contrast, will have a flower head like this at the top of the stem, but that flower head will branch. It can have a couple more flower heads above it. And those will branch again. You can have up to 4 tiers of flowers with umbulatum, but with this species here, you have only one. Another significant difference is the leaves. I think I'll go to the next slide here. Yep. That's habitat. Let me back up again. The leaves of flavum tend to be much longer and narrower and pointed on the ends than those of umbulatum, which tend to be more rounded. So this is a typical habitat. These flowers, this plant grows up at a higher elevation. You don't see them below about 5,500 feet, and this location here is up at 6,000 feet. This is up by Diamond Peak up in the Blues, above Pomeroy. During the butterfly weekend that we had in the Blues, David James took us up into this area. When he took us to Mount Misery on that last day, some of you remember going there, we actually were very close to this field. And on the last day, everybody started breaking up to go home. Joe and I drove about a mile away to get to this field because it's an area that we knew about, and I wanted to check it out. By the way, this is a closer view. You can see the leaves tend to be slender and pointed, much more so than umbulatum. But we went to this big patch of, these are called yellow buckwheats, by the way. Just for a quick review, remember that our buckwheat blues come in two basic groups, the Batoides or square spotted group, and the Anoptes or dotted group. The left side is typical of the Batoides group of Euphalotes buckwheat blues. And on the right side, we see one that's much finer, maculated, finer, usually rounder spots. And this is the dotted blue group. And when we were at this field of yellow buckwheats, Joe and I started finding blues there, and these were Euphalotes blues. So I was very interested in them. They were of the dotted blue or Anoptes blue group, like the one on the right. This is not the individual I found there, but I was able to catch only one butterfly, but I saw several others. And interesting thing about it is the kinds of plants that the Anoptes group blues use are not present in that area. Those would be things like the northern buckwheat, the tall buckwheat, Eriogonum strictum, Eriogonum nudum. None of them occur in the area where this was. And these Euphalotes rarely go very far from the host plants. So I'm almost certain that this Anoptes group butterfly was using the yellow buckwheat as its host plant. And this is the first time we've documented any butterflies using the yellow buckwheat in Washington. But it also raises the question, what is this butterfly? It could possibly be Euphalotes columbiae, which simply is using a new host plant. But another possibility, Steve Kohler is a lepidopterist who lives and works in Montana, and he's identified Euphalotes ancilla, a different type of butterfly that we have not found in Washington. He has found ancilla on the very same, not just the same species of buckwheat, but the same variety. That's Eriogonum flavum variety piperi, as you see in the bottom right. That's the very same variety that we have there in the Blue Mountains. So it's a possibility that this could represent a new species. But we certainly need people to get into this area and make some collections and get those collections into a public repository where they can be studied. So people can try to decide if this is perhaps Euphalotes ancilla. I'm not going to give you the common name because I'm not sure. I think is it the Western dotted blue? That's not quite right. So anyway, it is a described species, and if we have it there in the Blue Mountains, this would be a new species for the state. So it'd be worth folks going up to that area and checking out the yellow buckwheat fields and see what they can find. This is Eriogonum umbulatum. I'm going to fuss just a minute here, try to get my screen. Okay, I can move some stuff here. Now I can read my own screen. Okay, this is Eriogonum umbulatum, the sulfur flower. And this is a very widespread plant that it occurs all over, well, anywhere that buckwheats grow, you pretty much will find umbulatum. And the program doesn't seem to be advancing. Oh, there it goes. Up at the top in the red print there. So there are an incredible 40 varieties of umbulatum that have been described. And we have 6 of these in Washington. The rest occur in various places, mostly in the western part of America. So our varieties here in Washington range from the tiny little variety Hausnechtii, which grows up in subalpine habitats, but also includes much larger varieties like the Magus, the white blooming buckwheat in the top center of this frame. Here's a typical habitat again in the Blue Mountains. Oh, I'm sorry, down at the bottom it says that this is in Reeser Canyon, which it is. This is a variety, Hypolium, and Hypolium is a real interesting variety of buckwheats. Let's take a quick look at it in the next frame. Oh, there it goes. This is Hypolium, a very pretty little buckwheat. It only grows up about 7-8 inches high, has these tidy little spoon-shaped leaves at the bottom, very bright sulfur-colored flowers. This variety of the umbulatum of the sulfur flower occurs only in this immediate area around the Wenatchee Mountains. So this area where Reeser Creek is, the road that we go up to the top of the mountains, and a little bit over the other side down towards Wenatchee. That's the world range of this variety. So this is our endemic buckwheat, one of our endemic buckwheats. Euphalotes glaucon has been associated with umbulatum, and there's been a lot of rethinking of glaucon here in Washington. John Pelham says he can't see any difference between this and our Heracleoides feeder, so he thinks probably glaucon is just a extra name that we don't need for our Heracleoides. Other people would disagree and think that glaucon is not only a real species, which we know it is in Oregon, but if it's associated with the umbulatum or sulfur flower, it's probably going to be glaucon. So I'm not going to try to take sides on that. I find it very difficult to tell these apart from the Heracleoides feeders myself. Eriogonum thymoides is the next buckwheat on our list.
Can we just pause for a second and go back to the Blue Mountains, and if you can go back to look at the Ancilla species, and a question about what month, what time of year you found the blues in the Blue Mountains.
Well, this was during the conference. This was in the middle of June this past year. And I've been to this same patch of yellow buckwheat previously and found absolutely nothing on it. And that was a little earlier in the year. But by mid-June, the flowers had opened up a bit more. And there were actually, I think, 6 or 7 species of butterflies that were using the plants at that time, including that Euphalotes. So that was mid-June.
Okay, I do want to make a note too. Jeanette and Bill asked the question that this is recorded and you can refer back to it online, and we can also have a further discussion at the end of Dave's talk. Okay, thanks, Dave, for pausing for that.
Back forward to where we were. Summit blue glaucon may or may not be a valid species for Washington. It's a pretty little butterfly, regardless whatever the outcome is going to be on that. And thymoides. This is a beautiful, compact little buckwheat. This grows in these very nice little compact cushions. When the flowers first start to bloom, the buds come up bright red, and then they turn yellow when they come into full bloom. And then as they start to senesce, then they turn another color again, more of an orange color. But this plant is identified primarily by the leaves. You see the leaf here on the bottom right segment, and the leaves fold over themselves so that the underside of the leaf is barely even visible, with the sides curled over. So that's one way to, the leaves are tiny and they're curled over like this. So that's one way to tell thymoides when you see it. There is a species of euphalotes, a buckwheat blue, which occurs on this plant. It's a very dusky little thing. This is a picture of it. This is from Nunnallee Coulee. And this is very likely going to be described as a new species. John Pelham and others are pretty well convinced that, Merrill Peterson too is pretty well convinced that this is a different species, which will be described and given a name. This butterfly occurs both on the Thymoides plant and on the larger Sphaerocephalum, which blooms about the same time as Thymoides, just a little bit later. Eriogonum douglasii is kind of a shaggy looking buckwheat. It's less kempt. It's more well, just shaggy, and as the range maps indicate on the upper right, it occurs in both Washington and in Oregon, and it is one of the host plants for our most common euphalotes, which is Heracleoides, the so-called Cascadia blue. There's only one variety of douglasii that occurs in Washington. And here's a typical habitat. Well, I don't know how typical it is, but it's habitat. And this is in the Wenatchee Mountains, of kind of the east end of the Wenatchees. And this whole field is pretty much loaded with the Douglas buckwheat. And those same blues that I showed you a photo of are found all through this patch. Here's a pair of them, which are on. I got rid of something good. Was that black thing on the screen? Was that showing up in your view?
I'm not seeing a black thing. I'm just seeing the butterflies and then the text above.
Okay, good. It was just on my screen. Anyway, this is the Heracleoides feeder, which does feed on douglasii. Certainly at Elk Heights it does, and this picture is taken at Elk Heights, and this mating pair is actually on the douglasii flower. Sphaerocephalum, I mentioned the Thymoides has that cute little dark-sided euphalotes that occurs on it, that uses it for its host plant, and which will probably be described as a new species. That same butterfly also occurs on Sphaerocephalum. And I've seen it actually at this very location down the bottom, which is not far the other side of Vantage over in Grant County, overlooking the Columbia River. I've seen those blues flying back and forth between Thymoides and these Sphaerocephalum flowers. So they seem to be very comfortable on both of them. We have 3 varieties of Sphaerocephalum in Washington. And a couple of them, one of them at least, is pretty hard to distinguish. Here again is a view of the habitat of Sphaerocephalum, looking down on the Columbia River there by Vantage. Vantage is on the other side of the river. And these really nice little rounded half sphere clumps are all over the hills, and they're very striking when they're in bloom. Here's another Euphalotes batoides group that occurs on the Sphaerocephalum. This is taken up at the Ellensburg viewpoint. I think that's on highway, I think that's 84, isn't it? The one that goes from Ellensburg down to Yakima. And there's a viewpoint as you drive up that highway, the freeway. In Oregon, Sphaerocephalum can look very different. This is a Sphaerocephalum at Burns, Oregon. Now the plant is the leafy part of the plant is fairly similar. It forms half round spheres of leafy structure, but the flower stems are much longer than they are in our Sphaerocephalum. And so the flowers themselves extend out much further away from the basal plant. Interestingly, there's a buckwheat blue, a euphalotes, which occurs on these sphaerocephalum in Oregon. And this is it. This is one of the real interesting buckwheat blues in the region, because this one has these very heavy, square, blocky spots, especially on the forewing, which just practically shouts that this is a Batoides group buckwheat blue. But when you dissect the genitalia, you find out immediately, no, it's not. This is a dotted blue, a very heavily maculated dotted blue that occurs on sphaerocephalum in Oregon. So this is one of the things you have to be careful of sometimes. What a butterfly appears to be isn't necessarily what it is.
So Dave, a question about that. How are you so confident that that is an ancilla? Because it looks so different from the previous one that you showed.
It does indeed. I actually, well, first of all, this had been reported from this area by other people like Andy Warren. But I went down and found them, and I collected a few of the butterflies, and I dissected the genitalia. And it was very clear, very quickly and easily, that the genitalia are those of a Noctes group butterflies, not a square spotted group. So it's very easy to tell when you dissect this particular individual.
Wow, so much for morphology.
Yeah, well, morphology works most of the time. Heracleoides, this is a real shaggy buckwheat which occurs all over many areas of Washington. You can see on the range map on the upper right that it's all over eastern Washington and eastern Oregon. Very widespread and very common. The flowers, the red flowers in the middle, these are flowers that are just starting to open, and many of our buckwheats will have one color when they're still in the bud form like this, and then when they open to a different color, like on the bottom right. They have this interesting kind of yellowish white color to the flowers. And this is one I feel pretty confident identifying at 60 miles an hour on the road. This one is pretty easy to figure out. It is larval host for blue copper or Euphalotes heracleoides, our so-called Cascadia blue, and also the lupin blue, Plibus lupini. And we have several varieties of these in Washington, 3 or 4 varieties. And here's a female Euphalotes that's ovipositing on heracleoides. This is at Elk Heights. I think many of you have been to Elk Heights. It's I-90 going east out of Seattle. It's you go past the Indian John Rest area, which is just past Cle Elum. And the next interchange past that is Elk Heights. And there's a nice area there just off of the highway, off of the freeway, that has no less than 5 species of buckwheats. And the buckwheat blues are certainly there too. It's a very nice little area to visit. We stop there frequently in the spring. And this is another individual. This was one which was reared from Chumstick Mountain up in much higher elevation in Chelan County. This one was reared from larvae which were collected on the Heracleoides plant. And the pair of them. For those who are at the summer meeting of WABA up at Eden Valley Ranch up in northern Okanagan County a few years ago, this mating pair of buckwheat blues were right out in front of our cabin. We were staying right on the ranch site there during that conference. And these were mating on the Heracleoides right out in front of us. Pyrolifolium, this is an interesting plant. Pyrolifolium grows at high altitudes in Washington. It's called the alpine buckwheat. It's a very low growing plant. It grows only a few inches off of the ground. And as you can see, it has these big spoon-shaped glossy leaves, and the flowers are either white or pink, or usually some combination of white and pink. This buckwheat, this buckwheat does have blues, euphyllodes associated with them. And we're not sure at this point just what they are. We have two varieties of the plant in Washington. Again, all of them at higher elevation. This is a patch on the south side of Mount Adams in Yakima County. And I hiked up into this area a few years ago and found these pyrolifolium plants growing. You can see they grow in rather desolate habitats. I did not find any blues in this particular time. This is up at Corral Pass in Pierce County. This is just north of Mount Rainier. This is a lovely spot where we used to visit there with some of our WABA field trips. Unfortunately, this whole area was involved in a monster wildfire back about 5 years ago, and I'm not sure what the status of this area is anymore. I know down lower at Corral Pass itself, where the road is, the forest is completely black. It's just totally dead. But up here, I'm not sure how things have fared. But anyway, the bald area at the bottom of the picture is an area where pyrolifolium plants grow in substantial numbers. And that was one area that I was watching to see if I could find any blues on it. I never did find blues there. However, Merrill Peterson has found blues, and these are blues of the plebeius lupini type. We don't know for sure if they are lupini or something else, but he found these on this very same plant, Eriogonum pyrolifolium, on the southwest side of Mount St. Helens down in Lewis County. This was after the volcano blew, so that area should still be good. David James found them up in the Wenatchee Mountains in northern Kittitas County. This is up over 6,000 feet elevation, way up near the Kittitas-Chelan County line, up on top of the mountains there. And Ben Moose has found them not too far away, a little further west in the Alpine Lakes Wilderness area in Kittitas County. So we have these blues, lupin-type blues that occur on pyrolifolium in Washington, but we don't know for sure what they are, if they're just lupin blues or something else. Down in Oregon, a place called Dutchman Flats, which is just east of Bend, Oregon, we have this lupin-type blue, which is found on pyrolifolium. This, on the left side, we have the blue sitting on the host plant pyrolifolium, and they do use this plant as their host plant. And from early on, the first lepidopterists to find them in this area declared that this has to be a different species of blue. And so ever since, we've been waiting to hear, well, what is it? What is it? And to this day, it has not been thoroughly studied and has not been described as a species. So we're not sure if it'll turn out to be just the lupin blue or if it's something different. And that will certainly affect how we try to study the ones that occur up here. They seem to be very similar lupin-type blues that occur on pyrolifolium, and we do have them in several places here in Washington.
I wanted to chime in with a note from Melanie that she's seen Eriogonum pyrolifolium at Chinook Pass and also at Slate Peak.
Not all surprised. I'm a little surprised at Slate Peak, only because I've looked for them there and didn't find them. But those are the proper elevations, certainly. Did you find any butterflies on the pyrolifolium?
She said an Ackman type was visiting at Chinook Pass, visiting the flowers at Chinook Pass.
Ooh, cool. There's another plant that occurs down in that same area in Oregon. This is the Eriogonum marifolium, or the mirum leaf buckwheat. And this has its own kind of blue that occurs on it and uses these plants as the larval host. And this blue too, this is a euphyllodes. The other one is a plebeius. So this is a euphyllodes, which uses this plant. And this plant is called a dioecious, which means it's the plants are sexually dimorphic. The yellow plant on the right is the male flower, and the red plant on the left is the female of the species. And this plant has been reported from Washington. If you see the range map up here, you see Yakima County is gray. It's not black with a question mark on it. I cannot just disregard this record because it's no other than Jim Reveal himself, the master of all things buckwheat, who reported it from there. Nobody else I've ever talked to has ever found the plant up there. But if it occurs in Washington, we may well have the mystery Euphalotes up there as well, the mystery Euphalotes that occurs on this plant in Oregon. Like that previous we were talking about, the first researchers into this area saw the Euphalotes on this plant and declared that it too had to be an undescribed species. And now years later, we're still waiting for somebody to study that species or to describe it to see if it is indeed a different species. And if it is, we'll take great interest in trying to find this plant again up here in Yakima County. There's only one variety, and it's only possibly in Washington, we're not sure. Here's what the habitat looks like at Dutchman Flats near Bend, Oregon. It's very desolate looking country, but there's a lot of these pyrolifolium plants. You can see the yellow plants out here in this desolate flat area. This is volcanic, what's the right term? Cinder fields, volcanic cinder fields. Anyway, this is our buckwheat out here, this yellow one. And if you look around, you'll see the red ones out here as well, the males and the females. And this is where the Euphalotes, these little low plants. By the way, this looks like it's probably a lowland area. It's not. This is actually over 6,000 feet high. So this is also a high elevation area. But you can drive to this one. The pavement is just off the screen to the right. That's my kind of place. Here's again the male and female plant. If you just walk around and look at these plants out in these cinder fields, you will find the blues on them. Here's the mating pair. By the way, these Euphalotes have been given a tentative common name, but it's called the pumice blue, and you'll see this in Bob Piles and Caitlin Labar's most recent book, The Butterflies of the Pacific Northwest. You'll see this name pumice blue given to these Euphalotes. But again, we're not sure what they are, if they're anything different. And if they are different, then we have to wonder, well, are they found in Washington? Here's another Euphalotes. This one's actually ovipositing on the Marifolium plant down there in Oregon. This is Mount Adams. This is looking north from near the town of Trout Lake. And this is the area where Jim Reveal reported Marifolium in Washington. And that arrow that appears on the right, that's about where he found it, somewhere up there on the east flanks. Now that's Yakima Indian Reservation. I don't know if they are real keen to have a lot of people tripping up there looking for buckwheat plants, but that's generally where they were found. And this is a real mystery whether they're still up there or whether we can find them. If we do find them, are we going to find this mystery Euphalotes blue on them? Moving into the next genus, next subgenus, this is Eucycla. These are the other, by the way, these first two groups are perennial buckwheats. These are ones that grow up from woody roots year after year in the same place. We have 7 species in this group, and several of these are known to host butterflies as host plants. And one way that these can be separated from the Oligogonum or Oligogonum subgenus is by the leafy bracts. Again, these leafy bracts usually occur right below the flower clusters, or sometimes in the mid stem of the flower stem. But those leafy bracts will have three bracts, three leafy, what looks like three little leaves, and usually in a rosette around the stem. And that does not occur in the other subgenus, the Legogonum, but there are two up to I don't know, 7 or 8, but never 3 in the other subgenus. One of our most common plants in this group is the tall buckwheat, Eriogonum elatum, and this is one that's very easy to identify. It has these huge basal leaves and naked stalks going up, branching freely and openly, and having these little bottom left, these little pink flowers, and then growing in dense fields that can be very abundant in some areas. This buckwheat is used by a number of plants. As we saw earlier, it's a guild plant, which hosts at least 6 different Lycaenas as their larval host plant. There's only one variety of elatum in Washington, so if you identify it to species, you've also identified it to variety. Here's a typical field of elatum that can grow very dense and they grow quite high. I'm going to venture that they probably grow certainly over 3 feet high, possibly up to 4 feet high in places, and in these very dense stands. When you find a field like this, it's in fresh bloom. If you walk through this field, you're likely to find numbers of butterflies. And Euphalotes columbia, or Columbia blue, uses this plant. It's one of its 2 primary plants that it uses. It uses the northern buckwheat earlier in the season, and when northern buckwheat, that is compositum, starts to senesce, and it switches over to elatum, which by that time the tall buckwheat is coming into bloom. Eriogonum nudum. This is a plant that occurs in several areas of the state, around Rimrock Lake, near White Pass, and various other places up in the high mountains and on down toward the Mount Adams area. These look a lot like the Eriogonum elatum, the tall buckwheat, except the basal leaves are much smaller. They're small and they're round, whereas elatum has these huge pointed leaves at the base. The leaves are very different, but the plants themselves are really quite similar. Bare stem buckwheat nudum doesn't grow quite as tall as elatum, and it's much more restricted in its range. It's found in only a few areas. As indicated in the bottom center picture here, for some reason, nudum likes to grow in very steep areas, often highway cuts, road cuts, where it's a fairly loose type of soil that's formed into steep banks. That's where we typically see nudum. Only one variety of nudum in Washington. And here's a better look at a complete plant. This one's not quite in full bloom. It's mostly in bud out, as you can see out at the sides here. This is the kind of habitat where it grows. It's like, yikes. This is Highway 12 on the left. This is the main White Pass Highway. And we're looking east in this picture. Rimrock Lake would be way down below us and on our right. But if you stop on, this is 2 or 3 miles from White Pass, you can stop in one of the pullouts here and look down over the steep edge here. You'll probably be looking at a lot of bare stem buckwheats. They grow fairly densely on these steep slopes, but it's hard to go down on these slopes. You're kind of taking your life in your hands. It's steep and the slopes are not very stable. Euphalotes anoptes. The anoptes blue has been associated with Eriogonum nudum in this area. Some people, notably John Pelham, is of the mind that Anoptes is the same thing uh, as our much more common uh, I don't know,
Columbia.
Columbia, thank you, the Columbia blue. He thinks he has trouble distinguishing Anoptes from Columbia. I know Bob is probably strongly of the mind that Anoptes is absolutely valid. We'll probably have some discussion about that later, but they are hard to separate. They're pretty similar, and we don't have very good guidance on how Anoptes is different from Columbia. So this obviously requires a little more study to figure out what we have exactly. Do you have any comments on that, Bob? Just not.
Yes, I do. I'm not strongly of the countervailing opinion from John because I don't know enough about these blues. I don't have the discriminating eye that you fellas do to tell all the incriminating details apart. But Andy Warren was of the opinion that true Anoptes, true Californian Enoptes, was strictly on Eriogonum nudum in Oregon. And it was he who invited us to look, any of us, to look for it in Washington. Whereupon Tia and I found one of the only identifiable stands of nudum at that time from the UW herbarium, the site that Art Krukeberg had found on the East Fork of the Titan River. And then not long after that, henna blue was there on the nudum. And then shortly thereafter that, you and Joe found it on White Pass, and some other people have since. But, so naturally, we were inclined to think, well, we followed Andy's invitation and we found Enoptes on nudum, which we did. But since then, John, with his very good eye on these things, has lost faith in at least the Washington Enoptes being separate from Columbiae. I'm not sure he's saying that the entire species Enoptes is invalid, but he thinks maybe the extension of it up here might be conflated with the Enoptes. And Andy's gone. That's why a lot of these species you're referring to in Oregon that were assumed to be new species have never been followed up because Andy went to Florida. He was the one doing a lot of that work. So now we're down to the age of genomics and, sort of waiting in line for the genomics people to pronounce upon these issues. And as it stands now, I don't know. I'm of a mind where I'd very much like to know. Of course, for sentimental reasons, I'd love it to be a full species in Washington, but that's no reason for science. And the real answer will lie probably in the genes, and we may know at some time. And perhaps it is only Columbiae, which does occur just down the road on Elatum. So who knows? I tend to think they're a little bit distinctive. They tend to remind me of the Enoptes at Tioga Pass in Yosemite, and I think they might really be Enoptes, but I don't know enough to say for sure. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Yeah, I'm on the fence on this too. I read over Andy's tome on the Oregon butterflies a number of times, trying to pick out the differences between Enoptes and between nudum and forgot it again, Bob.
Between Enoptes and Columbiae.
Columbia, yeah. And I thought I could see the differences that Andy had mentioned in his book. And I studied them pretty carefully, but John doesn't seem to think that he can pick out those characters. Anyway, that does remain to be seen, and I hope that the genomics can help us Genomics isn't always that great for separating closely related species, but we'll just have to wait and see what they come up with on this. Anyway,
Oh, and Dave, if I may, at this point, you're right about that. And the genitalia, you mentioned how clear it is with the genitalia to dissect them between the Anoptes group and the Batoides group. And that's clear, but the genitalia aren't always so good at the species level, are they?
right, it's real easy to distinguish the Anoptes group from the Batoides group, but
Yeah.
Anoptes versus Columbiae, it's probably going to be much more difficult.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is what the larva looks like, and this is one of those Anoptes from Rimrock Lake area, and I don't think I can really distinguish this from Columbiae. They look very similar to me. You wouldn't expect huge differences in the larvae, but they feed only on the flowers and on the buds. Also occurring on that very same plant in the very same area there around Rimrock Lake is the Ackman blues. And one thing we found in the past several years is the Ackman blues seem to, by the way, how am I doing for time? Can you?
Oh, it's just a few minutes past 7. I think you're doing fine, Dave.
Slipping out, okay. I'll try to hurry up here. Anyway, the Ackman blues that we find in this area are much larger than those that we find down in the scrubby lowlands. These are as big as our basically our largest blues that occur in the area, like Icarioides. These are virtually the same size as Icarioides, and yet they're clearly Ackmans. So we've dubbed these the Montane blues because they're so different in size, but we don't know if they'll eventually be a different species or a different variety or a different population or what they'll be. But these are very large Ackmans that occur up there around Rimrock Lake. Strictum, another messy plant, another Eucycla subgenus. And these have been found to be an intermediate host for our same Columbia blue. The Columbia blues use the northern buckwheats, composite them in the early part of the season, and when those blooms start to go, then they'll switch over to the tall buckwheat. But oftentimes there's a gap between those two species, and this strictum seems to occur right in that gap, and we have found Euphyllodes Columbia using this plant as well. There's 3 varieties of strictum in Washington. Here's strictum habitat. It can be pretty scruffy looking habitat. And here's, this is a Euphyllodes Columbia that I found the larva on a strictum and reared it to this individual. So they look like they're clearly Columbia. Here's a beautiful picture of a variety of strictum. This is a photo that David James took right practically in his backyard, right on the neighbor's property. This is variety proliferum, lovely variety with these purple and white flowers. The yellow flowers are the more typical, but some of these buckwheats have interesting varieties like this. Nivium is our next Eriogonum, our next buckwheat. This is snow buckwheat. This grows down in the low country, down along the Columbia River, basaltic area, and they're very similar to Eriogonum strictum. They're very similar in structure. Very difficult to tell the two apart, except by the blooms. Nivium blooms white, and it blooms very late in the season. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised that Nivium is still in bloom right now over by Vantage. We saw them there just a couple of weeks ago. And there's lots of them, so many that it's turning some of the hills white. There's only one variety here. And we know that the Mormon metalmark uses it. We don't know of any other butterflies that use it as their larval host plant. Eriogonum ovalifolium, this pretty little plant grows mostly at higher elevations. Has these nifty little basal leaves and these naked stems going up to little pom-pom flowers. We have 3 varieties in Washington. Ovalifolium flats in some areas, like here at Craters of the Moon in Idaho. This is a volcanic cinder flat, and you can all these little white spots you see. Those are all individual ovalifolium plants, thousands of them. And here's our Washington version of the same thing. This is up at Corral Pass, and we see the ovalifolium plants growing scattered around in the rocky basaltic rocks.
I have a question. Bob is asking whether Ackman occurs on Nivium or not.
If it occurs on what?
Eriogonum Nivium.
Nivium?
I think you said there weren't any other butterflies but the Mormon metalmark, Dave, but isn't Ackman awfully common on the Nivium in lots of places?
There are other butterflies found on Nivium in other states, I think especially Oregon. I don't think it's been found in Washington on Nivium.
I would disagree with that. I find it abundant on the Nivium and solely on the Nivium, both in the gorge and up in Spokane Indian Reservation.
Well, that's good to know. I'd be happy to add it to the list. I just haven't seen it myself.
Yeah, the little tiny autumn ones.
One of the little lowland Ackmans.
Yeah.
Okay.
And another question to go back and look at the data on the ovifolium again.
Ovalifolium?
Yeah, sorry, ovalifolium, yeah.
Was there a question on that?
On the data sheet.
The data sheet, oh, okay. On this
Yeah,
one?
yeah, I
Okay.
think it's that one. Dan Dunphy wanted to have another look at that. Did you have a question, Dan? You can unmute and ask if you like.
No, I'm good. I just needed to take a picture of it.
Okay, there we go.
Thank you.
And this is recorded so you can see it on our website too later.
So just clarification, Dave, that's the one that the spangled blue feeds on in the Olympics. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. In fact, I think I have a picture of it coming up in the Olympics.
Great.
If you don't mind me forwarding here. This is Mount Townsend in the Olympics, and ovalifolium does occur up here. In fact, this is it. And yeah, the spangled blue does occur on this plant. I haven't found it there myself yet. I've only managed to struggle up to the top of that mountain once. So I don't think my old body's going to make it up there again. But yes, and here's a gorgeous variety of ovalifolium. Cheryl Billion just photographed this this summer, and she found it up in the North Cascades, west of Palmer Lake, up there in the high country.
Regina says that she found ovalifolium on Mount Townsend.
On Chumstick. Okay.
Mount Townsend. Mount Townsend.
Okay. Yeah. Good. That's.
Regina, did you see the butterfly? Yeah. Okay. The butterfly. Yeah. She says she saw the butterfly on the buckwheat, and she took a photo.
That's good. The ovalifolium were almost. This was the only plant I could find fresh blooms on when I was up there. The others were past prime, and I think I missed the butterfly flight when I was there. But they are known in that spot. And here's an ovalifolium in Oregon. Yikes. This is what we see when we look at a larger area. Some of these plants are very different in other areas. The basal leaves are actually fairly similar to our ovalifolium, but these in Oregon, and again, this is near the town of Burns, they have, as you can see, long, slender stems with bright yellow flowers. So this looks quite a bit different than ours. Microthecum, this is a very woody plant that occurs in low areas along the Columbia, and this was taken near Vantage. These are certainly not the most photogenic plants that we have, but they bloom with these white blossoms like we have in the bottom center. We don't know too much about butterflies that use this. In other areas, the blue copper, Mormon metalmark, gray hairstreak. The only thing I found here that was almost certainly using it for a host plant was the gray hairstreak, and maybe the Akmon blues. And in Nevada, they host a completely different Euphalotes that we don't have. Euphalotes pallescens, the pallid dotted blue. But there may be more butterflies that use this plant, but it blooms very late in the season, so it's not really available for the life histories of some of our butterflies. It too was just, it was still blooming over by Vandy just a couple of weeks ago, so it blooms late in the season. One variety in Washington, again, Strymon melinus, the gray hairstreak, is the only one that I've definitely associated with it. Eriogonum codium, this is a very rare buckwheat. It's found only on the Hanford Reservation, and it's very difficult to get in to see this plant because it's protected by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and by Hanford. You have to get clearances from both of the agencies, and have to sell your soul to get in there, and you have to know somebody that has a pass key to get you in. Difficult to get in and see this, but they're very interesting. They grow on this bluish fragmented volcanic rock, and the plants take on the same bluish color. That bluish color is real. That's not something wrong with my photograph. In fact, the next picture, I think this is looking across the codium in the foreground, looking to the far hill, and you can see that the far hill is green and the codium are blue. That really shows the color difference. And we don't have any butterflies associated yet with this host plant, but I've only managed to get in to see them one time, and it happened to be a cloudy, windy day. So I just don't know what butterflies might use these plants. I'll go quickly through this. We're getting into the annual buckwheats now. This is the subgenus Ganoisma, and we have 3 species that occur or have occurred in Washington. Ganoisma, when you get a close look at the plants, these are distinguished by having flowers that hang from the stems. They have pendulous flowers. And you can see that in the bottom picture here. See how the flowers hang down from the stems? That's typical of this subgenus. This happens to be Eriogonum cernarum. This plant has been found on the Hanford Reservation. It's only in the most restricted part of the Hanford Reservation, so you can't get in to see this at all. And I know it's recorded on the university's web page as occurring there, but I've never seen it in Washington. One variety here. This is a very closely related species, which I photographed in Nevada to show how the flowers, again, are pendulous, hanging from the stems. Maculatum is another buckwheat in the same subgenus. This plant it's called spotted because on the bottom left picture you can see that the flowers are colored such that they look spotted from a little distance. And this plant was known from right I guess in the city limits of Yakima, down along the Yakima River, but it apparently has been extirpated because it has not been seen since the 1930s. And botanists have been out looking for this, but it still may pop up. We never know. It was here. This is Spurgelinum, and this has actually been reported from Washington, but I think that was probably an error. It hasn't been replicated since. This is an important plant for blues down in Oregon. This is a plant that David James has been monitoring quite a bit, together with the blue that uses it. Here's a field of Spurgelinum. These reddish colored plants, that's Spurgelinum. You can see they grow very thick in some areas, almost like grass. Here's a closer look at these little plants. They only grow about 6-8 inches high, And you can see that the flowers just kind of hang down from the stems. And here's the guy that uses them. This is Leona's little blue. This was discovered on these plants down there in Oregon. It was discovered and named to a brand new species, one of the only species to be described new in the United States in, I don't know, something like 30 years at the time. And it gets considered to be threatened. That's why David James has been down monitoring both the plant and the butterfly. Oregonium is our last subgenus, another subgenus of annual buckwheats. And in this subgenus, the flowers are pressed. They're pressed tightly against the stems. They're not pendulous at all. Eriogonum baileyii is one of our two plants that we have in this group. I had not seen them until this summer in Washington, but again, one variety here. But this is an area that a botanist from Native Plant Society told me about. This was at the Wanapum Overlook in Grant County, so this is not far from Vantage. And we see these little plants growing. They like sand. They grow in sand, especially stable sand. And you can see that the flowers are little white flowers with red midribs. We don't know actually what butterflies use these annual plants, if any. They're scarce enough that the plants are hard to find, much less the butterflies. This is our other annual in that same group, and this is closely related to the one we just saw. This is Vimenium, the broom buckwheat. This is found mostly in the southern parts of Washington, like just north of the Blue Mountains and again down along the Klickitat River area. There's two varieties of this in Washington. And this is a closer look at a Vimenium plant. This is a picture I actually took down in southern Idaho, but it's the same plant that we have here. And I'm finally to the end of all these plants and butterflies. So I'll open up, see if there's any additional questions.
Okay, lovely. Everyone feel free to unmute and jump in with questions. So this is our open discussion period. I have a question about the buckwheats found in the Hanford area. It sounds like they're being monitored. Are they protected or simply by the restricted access?
Well, the Eriogonum codium is very much protected. I'm not sure if it's gotten full endangered status yet, but it is federally listed. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has taken considerable care with it. It's had some real problems. It's very susceptible to fire. And when a fire sweeps through the area, it kills the plants. The plants do not survive. And something like half of the population has been wiped out in the last 6 or 7 years by a series of wildfires. So yes, it is being monitored, it is being watched, and it is declining. The plants live to a very old age. When a number of the plants were killed by fire, they were able to go in and cut those plants and count the growth rings, and they found that some of these plants were more than 100 years old. So they grow to a very old age.
Wow, that's astonishing. It seems like some of the federal agencies are becoming more interested in pollinators. I was wondering if you know of any interest in beyond just the plants themselves to identify relationships with insects.
Well, the bumblebee people are obviously very active, and bumblebees certainly do use some of our plants. I've seen them using Eriogonum nudum, for example, up around Rimrock. That seems to draw a lot of bumblebees in. I don't know of any specific studies with respect to buckwheats, but they certainly do have a lot of bees using them at times.
I guess I was thinking about those two species that occur in Hanford, and it seems like you don't know of any butterfly associations, and I was just wondering whether there's any plan afoot to look at that.
No, I just don't have any more information on that. Again, our access is so limited; it's hard to even get in there. I would love to get in and watch these plants in the spring, especially during better weather. But you're so restricted in when you can go. You have to get a security clearance, and you have to go to Tri-Cities to get that from fishermen or from the Hanford people. They take your photograph and give you an entrance badge, which will entitle you to go in one time. You have to tell them when you're going to be there in advance, and if the weather happens to be bad, too bad. Anyway, you have to turn in your badge afterwards. So it's real hard to get in there and study these things.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether Fish and Wildlife is interested in recruiting people to help them with some of the pollinator species.
They may be, I don't know. There was a lady that was studying them at the time that I went there, and it was her key that got me into the gate, actually. So they certainly have people interested in them, but I don't know how active they are at present.
Yeah.
Ask another question about the Hanford species. Dave, the species, tell me again what the species of buckwheat is on the, I imagine that's somewhere near Rattlesnake Mountain, is it? The one that's on the blue soils?
Oh, yeah, that's the Mtanum buckwheat, the one we've been talking about.
Right. Well, I'm curious.
Oops.
Art Kierkegaard studied, of course, the relationship of plants to soils a great deal, and in particular to the soils with heavy metals and those kinds of things. So, for example, there's a population of elatum, Eriogonum elatum, up near Derby Canyon in the Chumsticks that happens to grow on a bank which is full of heavy metals, nickel in particular, and that causes the plants to be stressed and to grow in a dwarfed condition. And those were mistaken for Eriogonum nudum because of their dwarf size, but they in fact turned out to be elatum. So I'm wondering if this blue soil and the apparest plants close to the ground, which is often the case with the heavy metal plants, are linked, and whether there's any particular edaphic studies that you know of that have been done up there about particular mineral concentrations that would affect the plants growing in them, and thereby affect the buckwheats and possibly the butterflies as well. Certainly in Britain and some other places, there are some butterfly plant associations that are particularly associated with the soil types. And I wonder if that could be the case with this blue soil, blue buckwheat association.
I've certainly wondered exactly the same thing, and I've kind of tried to speculate what the mineral might be that causes this blue or purple color. They are trying to get this plant established in different areas. They have a nursery up in Chelan County that's rearing small plants of codium so that they can try to grow them in other areas. And David James is actually working with them. This is in the Cowichy Reserve. This is not the Cowichy Canyon, not the southern part of the reserve. I'm sorry, the downstream part. This is up further, up in the hills, and Cowichy Conservancy owns a hill where they've actually planted these plants. But I would certainly be interested in the mineral makeup of these soils to see if, they may need a special type of soil that will support these plants. Well,
exactly. Julie McDonald just mentioned that Art worked a lot on serpentines. That was the word I was trying to think of. Absolutely. More studies on serpentines than most things. And it turns out that in Northern California, Lepidopterus have found several populations of butterflies that are particularly associated with serpentines, including, well, in Southwest Oregon too, including a Mardon skipper population that's serpentine restricted.
Well, that's interesting. The Eriogonum conference 2 years ago was down at Weed, California, and that was in the Serpentine area. And we had field trips out into the Serpentine rocks. And yes, we saw species of buckwheats down there that don't occur anywhere else. So that's very true.
That would be very interesting if codium is in fact soil limited or metal limited.
Yeah, it certainly would be interesting. And it might give them a clue for how to propagate these things elsewhere.
So is serpentine rock with a particular mineral composition? I don't know what.
It's ultra basic. They're called ultra basics. Is it ultra basic or ultramafic? I think it's an ultra basic. They're from very deep. They're very, very old, under enormous pressure, and they're very limited in their nutrients. And I don't remember the actual composition of serpentine, but it's alien to a lot of other life forms. It's not a good soil, generally as a potting soil. But on account of that, some of these heavy metal bearing special rock and soil types have developed associations with plants that have become adapted to them so that they can utilize these habitats that few other things do. So for example, the cobra lilies have serpentine adapted populations in the bogs around the serpentine outcrops. And that's true of not just serpentines, but nickel-bearing plants. Yeah, manganese, Regina says, and a number of the other things. But they tend to come from very ancient, very deep formed, and I think they're ultra basic rocks.
That's really interesting. I've wondered if maybe manganese might be one of the minerals that are found here with the codium habitat. Manganese and that for some reason the color strikes me as one that might be associated with manganese. So that's an interesting comment.
Yeah, because it's manganese. When you find old glass in the ghost towns and so on, in the old dumps, when you find old glass that's turned purple, we all know that purple of the old glass. That's because of the manganese concentration in the glass.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So Annalise, why don't you go ahead and unmute and ask your question?
Sorry, didn't.
Speaker issues. Am I being heard? Okay.
Yes, you're being heard. So go ahead and ask your question.
Are the butterflies that prefer buckwheats as host plants exclusively inflorescence feeders, or do some consume the leaves as well, or does it depend on the particular species of buckwheat?
Well, they absolutely, depending on the species, they absolutely do use other parts of the plant. The euphalotes, the ones we call buckwheat blues, just use the buds and the flowers almost exclusively. But the plebeius group, like the lupin blue and the Ackman blue, definitely eat the leaves.
Excellent, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So there were several people who weighed in with some observations. David Droppers, Melanie, Jeanette, and Bill. Do you have any comments or questions to add or ask?
I could tell that when Bill and Jeanette were asking about when those plants were found in the Blue Mountains, when you saw the blues, that they're planning an expedition for next year, right, Bill?
It could very well be.
Yeah, it could well be. That's right.
We did just look up serpentine on Wikipedia, and it appears to be magnesium rather than manganese that's associated with serpentine. And there was a question about whether it was ultramafic or ultra basic. It mentions ultramafic.
Okay, good, thank you.
And do you want to comment on any upcoming field trips?
Is that for me or for Bill?
For Bill.
I don't really have anything to contribute at this point. Thanks.
Okay, it just seemed like you were interested in Dave's observations in the Blue Mountains, so I was just curious.
Oh, well, yeah, this is for next summer, and we're always keeping lists and looking at possibilities.
I think everybody knows that Bill and Jeanette are legendary for finding neat things, and I think you could do a real service up there. The area where the yellow buckwheat grows is up between 5,500 and 6,000 feet. So it's up high. You just take the main road south out of Pomeroy and go clear up on top of the mountain up there, and you'll find the plants. And I just have a sneaking hunch that Euphalotes that occurs up there might be something really interesting. I have a grand total of one specimen. It was so ratty I didn't even photograph it for this presentation, but we saw others there at the same time, and I wasn't able to catch them. The hill is steep and rocky, and I'm just too darn old to go clambering over those areas.
Yeah, well, I completely understand, and Jeanette's more limber than some of those of us who are a decade or more older, but we've always enjoyed going over there. The few times we've been to the Blues, it's a beautiful area. So even if there are challenges, I'm sure we'd enjoy the trip, and it's good to have something in mind, a destination in mind, and if something works out, great. If it doesn't, it'll still be a great trip.
Well, I wish you the best of luck. It'll be real interesting to find out what these blues are. I'm not even 100% certain that Euphalotes blue was using the yellow buckwheats. I think they must have been, because there are no other potential host plants around for an Anoptes group blue. There were no tall buckwheats, there were no northern buckwheats, no strictum, no nudum. I'm almost certain that they are using flavum, the yellow buckwheat, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're a different species.
Yeah, well, we'll get back to you probably if that starts to come together as an actual event, and get some specifics, more specifics, and notes and things to keep in mind when we're over there.
Yeah, I can give you specific locations where I know there's flavum fields, but they're not hard to find. They're kind of all over up there.
Okay, great.
So Dave, the two times I've seen Ackman on Pyrolifolium were at Chinook Pass, and once it was on Pyrolifolium, the other time it was nectaring on Pearly Everlasting. And the first one on the Pyrolifolium actually landed on my knee, which was frustrating because I didn't have I tried to get my camera, and I was yelling to my son who was with me at the time, take a picture. So I didn't get any documentation, unfortunately. And I've looked every time I'm up in that area, and I know there's a couple of patches there that where I saw it, and I've yet to encounter it since that time, but I'll keep looking.
Was this on that big ridge up above Sheep Lake?
No, this was at the viewpoint. There's kind of a rocky outcropping before the one where all the tourists sit on along the Natchez Trail, looking down at Dewey Lake. I think it's Dewey Lake there.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a bunch of rocks, and then there's a kind of a chute that's also rocky, and there's Pyrolifolium in there.
So you're in the park?
Yes, very close to the boundary, but still in the park.
Ah, good to know.
Yeah, right above that little pond there, that
Not Tipsu.
No, it's I've tried to get a name for it. I think it's just listed as a crag or something like that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, that's good to know. Well, anyway, thank you all for sitting through my very slow and struggling presentation.
No, it was great. Any other questions or
Yeah.
comments? Okay, thank you very much, Dave. It was a real pleasure to have you join us and give us so much information. So our next meeting is the first Wednesday in December. That's the 7th. And David Droppers and Phyllis Reed from the U.S. Forest Service will be talking about their joint project that they've been working on up in that part of the world. So we hope to see you then. And thank you so much for joining us.
Okay,
Yeah, thanks again, Dave. You are just such a resource with all your buckwheat knowledge. It's really given me a leg up here in the Meadow Valley. So many thanks.
you have some beautiful buckwheats up there, but some of them right on your farm.
Well, now I know what they are, thanks to you and some of the information that you passed along in the past. So
Good.
that was fun.
Well, good enough. We'll see you later.
Okay, thanks very much, everybody. Have a
It's
good
a
night.
wonderful thing when, it's a wonderful
Bye.
thing when someone becomes so familiar with any aspect of our natural history that they can share it with the rest of us. That degree of completeness. It's rare, it's important, and it's very valuable.
And
Thank you,
generous. Yeah, thank you.
10-4.
You.
Okay, good night, everyone.
Good
Good
night.
night.